Them, well, there's a couple of them little people that's trying to test older people gangster, and host Mr. Chocolate with our resident co-host, Coach K. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I am all right. Had a little bit of fun doing the research and then just looking up other information on some of these folks. I'm like, oh wow. Yeah. Yeah, this whole
I don't see the subject line. Is it going to scroll across?
Oh yeah, I had it up there earlier.
Oh, okay. That's as long as the audience know what the subject is about, then we can get it cracking. But go ahead and tell me about your research.
Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Okay, so the 13 people that it was stuff out there for a lot of people, and then some of these people I kind of already knew, but saw some other stuff, and I'm like, yo. And,
well, I want if you would you just hold that until you get to your part, and then just bring it back into the audience, so we can kind of let them know where we're going with this. Because if you start talking, they may have to get on board.
Just to even rehash some of the stuff, I'm like, man.
Well, you want me to get started with this?
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, hello, Cocoverse. This is Coach K. As you've seen before, chaplain up there as far as the title, but I have several titles because I am
I'm gonna wait till this time.
Huh? It sounds like we're missing each other. It's the mic off.
Ability or credibility loss. Yes, ma'am.
Sound like we're missing each other in the conversation. Is the audio missing? Is it a delay in the audio? Can you hear me? Hello?
Oh, I didn't think.
Oh, I was trying to see if our audio was on a delay, because it seemed like I was talking and you were talking, and then it sounded like we were missing each other.
No.
Oh, okay. Well, as I said, sorry, audience, we're trying to get these technical things together. Hi again on this lovely Saturday evening for all of you who are tuning in with us. We missed you last night, had a few things, and so, I don't know, maybe we may...
Not that I can hear.
Move it. Huh?
I can hear you fine.
Oh, okay. Well, that how you just said I can hear you fine. That to me, that's as if we have it's a delay, because I said that a few minutes ago. Well, we're gonna get started.
Hello?
We're gonna get started, and then hopefully our technical...
Yes, I can hear you.
Our technical difficulties will actually kind of get in sync because it sounds like we're a little bit out of sync. So, what I'll do first is give you guys just a little backstory and what our subject matter is about, and then I'll let Mr. Chocolate come in and give you some highlights on um, a few things just to reflect on because the subject matter is quite crucial because we're talking about what happened when credibility is lost. And I think we're seeing that all over not only just the country, but we're seeing it all over the world. Uh, First and foremost, I remember when Dr. Fauci was standing up talking about the COVID situation, and he was standing beside then President Donald Trump. And as he was standing there, everybody seemed to be nervous for various reasons, because we have a physician, we have a president, we have all of the politicians, and everybody got their own agendas. And we saw that after COVID started putting people in the hospital, started closing businesses, and then everybody saw different ways on how they were capitalizing on misery. And really, that is that was a clear picture that people would start to lose credibility in each other. More importantly, people were starting to lose credibility in whatever the elites. And I put the presidents and all the politicians in that category because they actually work for the elites. They don't work for us. They work for the elites. They're the mouthpieces for the elites, just like uh, the uh, the news media, these large broadcasting networks. They work for the elites. They are owned by the elites, just as the music industry owned by the elites. Elon Musk and all of his ilk, elites trying to tell us how we can actually have thought. But I want you guys to just think of this person, and if you would, just if you can't find his book, and if better yet, see if you can find him on your YouTube channel because he's still alive, and his name is Mr. Neely Fuller. And Neely Fuller said back in the 70s, if you do not understand white supremacy, what it is, and how it works, everything else that you understand will only confuse you. And that is so true because we are seeing, like I said, we're seeing credibility loss in our country. And I'll give two examples. The mayor of New York, Eric Adams, he's lost credibility. He's lost credibility with his whole constituent because the Democrats in this country had decided how they were going to quail the voices of Black America. And when I use Black, I hope you guys start learning to understand. I'm using Black in the context that the United States put it into law. That's a political term. Our ethnicity is not Black. Our nationality is not Black. The hue of most of our skin is not Black. So if we can stretch how we understand that concept, I think it's going to help us to have better conversation with other people who quote unquote don't claim to be Black, because everybody else can claim anything they want as long as money come with it. And then as soon as money comes or look like it's going to come to the American indigenous melanated people that are called Black by legal definition, everybody else would try to find their roots. And if we actually start doing the research we need to do, all humanity came from melanated people. Melanated people occupied the planet long before the melanated people who had the albinisms and went off into the ice age. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that simply because The statement I just read from Nearly Fuller talk about white supremacy. White supremacy has been ruling this planet. Um, I'm going to give it since the Roman days, okay? Since the days of Caesar. You had Caesar, you had Fabian, you had um, some of those other people. You had, yeah, many people of Rome, and I'm going blank with the rulers. Claudius. You had all of these rulers, and they rule with the premise that whatever the leadership or the emperor, the Caesar, now we have what we call kings and queens, and whatever they say becomes a law. So therefore, in the sense of that, the king, and right now we're talking about the empire in um, England. England is ran by a monarch. The king tells the church what to say. Okay? The king is over the church. As a matter of fact, Charles's son, William, who is very anxious to be king, according to a report, that he's trying to usher his dad to advocate the throne so he can become king. Yet, at the same time, this is a man who couldn't tell you what was going on with his wife since December of last year. And now, according to a report, Kensington Palace has lost credibility. So, what does that mean for us, and how does that affect us? It affects us because the United States is a product of England. The United States and England, or the British monarch, or the British Empire, however you want to look at it, they are the people who are financing and standing with the genocidal maniac that you call Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, whatever he is over Israel, and how that relates to right now. Because not only are the mayors of major cities are being dismissed because nobody, especially us, Black people, have no respect for them. They've lost credibility. They've lied front, back, center, all around. They've tried to replace us. But I'm here to serve you notice so you can serve notice to everybody in your community. We will never be replaced. There is no earth without us. We, as bad as the earth is, we are the energy that's holding the earth in balance, because everything else continues to be chaos. We may participate in wars, but we don't start wars. We didn't start any of the wars that's going on right now in the world. Europe has been fighting wars their whole existence. That's when they rose out of the cave, they've been fighting wars. And right now we have Netanyahu, who they call themselves Israelis, and then they claim to be Jewish, whatever that means, because many of these people do not practice Judaism. And I think this is a good segue into the day that's coming up tomorrow that some people in the Christian community call Easter. Well, if you call that Easter, how do you ration that thinking, Easter, with resurrection, whatever you call it, with this man who is not Jewish, who is in what you call the Holy Land, massacring people left, right, and center, And yet at the same time, the church is silent. My question is, well, what is the church going to talk about tomorrow? Because if they're talking about this person that they call, quote unquote, the Christ, then it's time for us to have a bigger conversation, because he may be a Christ, and I will let people have that argument. I have no dog in that fight. I've surpassed that as far as having that conversation. If Jesus was the Christ, then in the scripture it's asked the question, and that was John the Baptist. If are you the Christ? If not, shall we look for another? So if Jesus is the Christ, then why is John saying, if you are the Christ, or shall we look for another? Something about that statement, and if according to them that was real, but it's not. It's time for us to have real conversation. That idea, that concept, if that person was real, then what happened to the 16 personalities before this person we call Jesus? Were they real, or is this person real? Or do you still give credence, or do you still believe in this concept? Like I said, this is something everybody has to start struggling with. I'm getting back, I'm not off subject, because I'm getting back to what we call the empire. The empire of the Church of England, which is the top of the Church of England, used to be Queen Elizabeth. She's now dead. Her son is now king. Her grandson is set to be king. And nobody believes them. So the question now is, is the church going to fall apart? I would say yes. Because if you don't believe their monarch, then they're going to start questioning the so-called spiritual ruler. And the spiritual ruler is led by the monarch, not the Bishop of Canterbury, or whatever it is now. The Church of England is under the rulership of Kensington Palace. Kensington Palace keep putting statements out about the young woman who's married to William. And nobody can really say that this person did those pictures. And a report just came out in the Washington Post just today that AI experts are saying that that wasn't even a real person. So who are we believing? And can you believe even what you hear now? That's the report. That's the report from a so-called credible news source, the Washington Post, stating that that person that was sitting on that bench was AI manipulated. They're not going so far to say it was AI generated and this is not a real person. But we are seeing how, if we don't believe in our own thinking, our own knowledge. I'm trying to frame this in the context, and it's a little bit difficult because I'm not trying to give you just words. This is going to be a heavy load ahead for us. So I'm hoping that we understand that this is not a regular podcast. We really are trying to set a platform in motion where we can struggle with what it is we believe about ourselves. In other words, our true identity. Who are we? Because the society is going to fall apart. I'm not being as people call, I'm not being a prophetic voice. I am a prophetic voice, not being. I am. But I've studied this long enough. It's not because I haven't found the information and behavior patterns. I have. And we really all can see this. Just as we saw Anthony Fauci be discredited by the President of the United States and then the Congress, and now you don't see this man. Well, for me, Anthony Fauci lost credibility when I found out that he was the physician with the NHS early back in the 1970s. And he was part of the team that allowed a little 16-year-old child to die with what we call AIDS. See, this rabbit hole goes really, really, really deep. And when Mr. Chocolate started talking, we'll begin to see some of the connections, because this child had AIDS. This child had AIDS, but he lived 3 years before he died, which means this child had AIDS when he was 13. Somebody was having their way with this child in the St. Louis area. His information, his DNA, happened to get lost during when Katrina destroyed the hospital down in New Orleans. And what does that have to do with now? Because we still see the same thing going on. There is nothing going on right now that has not gone on and is going to go on. And for the most part, people are going to say, well, God is in control. I would like to ask, which God? Because of those of us who stretch the imagination, and for those of you who say maybe you're not Christian, but you may be Muslim, or you may be Hebrew Israelite, or whatever the other tradition, Seventh-day Adventist, I don't know. I'm putting that out there because we are going to have to struggle with our true identity. Are we of a melanin mind, which means we have compassion for all of humanity? We haven't decided that somewhere in our psyche we are a cut above the rest of humanity, because that is a melanin deficient mindset. And I wish we did have time to go through a lot of the things to make these connections. But I just want to tell you one story, and it's about the city of Lisbon in 1755. But before we get to the Lisbon story in 1755, when there was an earthquake, because that changed everything. That changed the dynamic that we call God. The city of Lisbon, Portugal. God lost all credibility at that time. But let's go back and let's look at a few more things, because we are sitting in the same chaos. In 1739, before the earthquake in Lisbon, on this side of the Atlantic Ocean, there were soldiers who had been a part of the Portugal Empire. And in 1739, there were people who had been enslaved. First of all, they had been in the military in their own country or own kingdom, because there were no countries at that time on the continent or in Europe. Just like there was no states when the colonizers came here in the 1700s. So we got big land masses everywhere. But in 1739, a group of slaves who had been ex-military in the Congo tried to free themselves. It was called a Stoner Rebellion when Europeans write it. If indigenous melanated people write it, it's going to be called an uprising, because that's what it was. We have to start looking at words and see how people use words. A rebellion simply means you going against something somebody else put in place. Well, that is the way the person who put it in place see it, meaning you're rebelling against what I say. But if you are the person who dare not want it to be in that situation anyways, then you are rising up. So we have to learn how to frame our own language. And these slaves who had been ex-military, they rose up in 1739. In 1739, they decided to take their own liberty in their own hand, and they went across South Carolina and they killed over 60 colonizers, planters, slave masters, whatever you want to call them. And they would have been more successful if they hadn't been met with tyranny. Okay? They were cut down. If you look at some of the posters, the news articles or stories or documentary, you will see that the slavers, when they caught all of these soldiers who were trying to free all of the people who were held in bondage at that time, they cut these men heads off and put them on sticks. But see, that wasn't the first time. That behavior came out of Europe. Why am I saying that? Because the people in America got very afraid. They put laws on the books in 1740 to make sure Black people could not even grow their own crops. So therefore, they weren't going to have any economic base. But they used the very thing that the European was holding them hostage, because at that point, Europeans who were the slave master began to force them to learn the Christian doctrine. They figure if they indoctrinate them with what they call the Bible. Remember, these people came from the Congo, but they understood the Catholic Church very well. They understood the behavior of the church, but at that time, Portugal was going through transition, because Portugal was like a New York, Los Angeles, Detroit, Chicago type thing. In 1755, Portugal was a booming city, what you would call a metropolis. Mind you, Portugal had just come into its own about 3 centuries earlier. Before then, all of that area you call Portugal, Spain, Italy, Morocco, Algeria, that was headed by General Tariq. You have to also ask yourself the question, why is that history not taught in anybody's school? Not just in the United States, but around the world. That's world history. They ruled that area for almost 800 years. So when we're talking about this concept of being black and white, if you got all these melanated people in high positions, who you think these pale skins going to try to lay with? It's the same thing now. But now we fall into the notion of calling people biracial, and that's nothing new. People have always slept with whom they choose to, or whom they can get curry favor or power. And now that power is slipping away. How do I know that power is slipping away? Because every time the public asks William about Kate, he deflects. Remember, William represents a whole empire. He does not just represent Charles's son, Diana's son. This man represents a whole empire that stretches across the world. And he can't even tell you where his wife is. But he deflects to his brother, who has a wife that everybody can pick on anytime they choose to. A woman who, according to her, she almost unalived herself because she felt all of the pressure. But now the commoner, okay? The commoner who's married to William get all the attention because, according to report, she has cancer. I work in a hospital. And I say that to say this. Hearing somebody say they have cancer, I'm really not moved. I'm not being callous. I'm just going back to the original question. Why didn't Kate come out earlier? If, in fact, saying you have cancer is not another deflection. And I say that as working with people who deflect all day when they don't want to speak on what's really bothering them. I don't know anything about that young woman. I don't really care to know about that young woman, not her personal life, but she's also a public person. She got more respect and still getting more respect for quote unquote her privacy, according to the media cycle and the propagandists. She's getting more respect given to her, and nobody can really say for sure if this is really this person or are they blowing smoke. And as the AP and the all of those other newspapers saying we can't trust them. So if you can't trust them, then even if she has cancer, can you even really trust that? I think it's time we start trusting each other and doing our own homework. Because while she was getting all of the privacy, we had a general over here in the United States who went through cancer, prostate cancer, use of prostate cancer killed men. He had to go back in emergency surgery and go back to the hospital. And the Joe Biden pretended, I think they said it on another podcast, pretended, or the news media pretended that this man had a secret surgery and didn't tell anybody, which was just a blatant lie. But that's how propaganda continues to flow, and we follow that. I haven't lost the fact that I'm going back to Lisbon, because this is also in reference to what we call Easter, Christmas, all of this thing we call Jesus. We have no evidence of this person. But instead of arguing that, I think it's time we just do like the people did in Lisbon when the earthquake happened. When the earthquake happened, it was on All Saints Day. Earthquake killed 10 to 60,000 people in the church. But that was only the beginning. We know tsunamis follow earthquakes. And case have it, a tsunami followed the earthquake and killed 200,000 people or more. That's just a report. I say that to say this. That was at the beginning of a whole country or a whole city, which was Lisbon, deciding they're not going to argue with this concept, because Europe has been fighting this idea and I say they call Christianity, has been hijacked. Christianity, the way the concept was originally formed, is laid out in a book called The 16th Christ. which means there were people who called themselves an anointed one. That's all Christ means before this concept of Jesus was put into play. When all these people got killed, they started what you call secularism. But it was more than that earthquake, because the earthquake just didn't shake Lisbon. It also shook the rest of Europe, because remember, Europe has been fighting wars for over 1,000 years. They are masterful in killing each other because those pale-skinned people have issues with melanin. So if they kill each other, guess what? They don't have any problem killing us. So I'm hoping that we can actually start gravitating toward Mr. Neely Fuller's concept, because really for the next 7 months, I'm going to break down some things, but I'm also going to show how we can learn from not only Portugal. We can learn from them. They were a Catholic city, okay? Catholics usually was in Southern Europe. Anglican were in Northern Europe. The Church of England broke away from Catholic Church. Simply means universal. That's what it meant. But there were many quote unquote popes from 1400 to 1800. And all of these people, they really hated regular people. That's the sad part about this story that I just told you. But if we think about it, even right now, most of the so-called be religious leaders, they don't necessarily like people, they like power, and that's sad. I am a licensed minister myself. However, my title in my job has nothing to do with the organized quote unquote congregation, because I work in a clinical setting. Everything I have to do has to do with life, behavior, and how do we struggle with these issues. And I'm good with that. The other I can do, I don't really care to do it unless we're talking about how we change this dynamic of what we call a structured church. I would recommend any of you guys who just heard something for the first time that has to do with the Jesus concept, that you do your own research. By all means, don't take the information I just gave you to your pastor. Do your own research. Don't even take my word. Because as I stated, we don't have enough time to go through the very basic of when that showed up in what we call the text. It was put in there. It was put in there by these same people that I just talked about, the bishops. The bishops elected what they call a pope. And we are where we are right now in history, the same place we were in 1755. We're in chaos. And some people are just checking out of the church because the church has lost credibility. The United States is full of white nationalists who somehow think their idea of what they call Christianity is the real Christianity. When everything Europeans have ever done, they've hijacked for melanated people. They've hijacked our stories, not only in the scripture, which came from the continent. They've hijacked our land and put us off and stole it. They've stole our legacies. They've stole our legacies. So it's time for us to start taking back everything that belongs to us, starting with our identity. Because if not, we will possibly be a remnant. And we don't have to be a remnant. I think I gave Mr. Mr. Chocolate a list of um, links for you guys to look at wherever you are in the state that we call America, or even if you're in another country, because no one person can give us all the information we need to be a whole community. And when I say a whole community, I'm talking about the community around the planet, because the planet really is a prison planet, and it's been held hostage for a long time. But the hostage that we've been subjugated to is falling apart. My question is to you, audience, how are you preparing yourself to move forward when this fall completely apart in their faces? Because everything happens in the spirit long before you see it in the natural. And what we're seeing now has already happened, really. So, my job is, how do I help you guys to continue to not only prepare yourself, but how do you prepare people that you love, people who are going to be coming behind you once you leave the earth? That's what I'm here to do. So, my hope is that we take just a little bit of the story, and you can find this earthquake story. As I stated, these people gave up on the concept of God, because that means they had to wrestle with, if this earthquake of God, then how did God make this happen? And then if this earthquake is not God, then there is no God. So they were in a conundrum. And instead of just wrestling with, it was an earthquake, it wasn't God, it was an earthquake. And how do you pick up the pieces? But that's the danger of listening to religious zealots to make everything about God. Because nobody could tell this whole community anything that was satisfying, when most of the time was dead. That's what happened when people check out of a system, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing it on different levels. This just happened to be an earthquake, and it's about religion. But you're seeing it right now in the United States, where the political structure is just, nobody really cares. You have two old white men who still trying to hold on to the white supremacy structure with all of that money that all of these very rich corporations and billionaires want to hold in place. And it's falling apart before them. So I would just say, how do we prepare to hold ourselves together while they're falling apart? Same way over in England. It's going to get worse. That situation with where is Kate, it's going to get worse, because nobody is giving a legitimate answer on where this person is, which is sad. This person was visible in December, and now from December to now, this person is pretty not seen. And most of the information that's being said is coming from people outside of the UK. It was only after they got pushed back from the national news that people in England were a little bit more at liberty to use their own voices. And that's what happened when you under a rule where, if you don't think the way I think, I shut you down. That is the root of what you call the church. You don't believe the way I believe, but the church itself was a military operation before it became a social structure. For all of you guys who still look at the church as, this is this wonderful place where you get saved, and I don't know saved for what or from what. That's what I was taught too. But now we have to be a little bit more, we have to go deeper into that dynamic and ask the question, if the Europeans did not, quote unquote, bring anything to the indigenous people around the world, but what they did, they came to steal from them, then you have to ask the question, is that doctrine that they put together, because they put that together, is it real for you? Because if it's not, then that means you have to find out what's real for you. And I would suggest you start looking inward to find out what it is you're looking for. Because when everything loses credibility, then where do you look? I would suggest you start looking inward and see if you're honest with you, to see if you're authentic with you, to see if you can actually find other like minds and walk this journey and find out what is it you can trust. Because when you cannot trust your leadership, we all doomed to be in a world of chaos. And that's really where we are. And with that, I'm going to allow Mr. Chocolate just to give us a few people that we may be looking at this point in life. Many of them are distractions for us, but they are part of our community, and we have to stop letting even people in our community distract us, because they don't hold really power. They may have a little bit, and he'll go through that, but they don't run any corporations, they don't run any banks, they don't run any industries. So if they don't run those, if they don't run government, then do they really have power? So hope you guys have a good Sunday tomorrow. And with that, I'm gonna land my plane and let Mr. Chocolate take off.
Hey everybody. I'm going to give you a list of people and what they're known for and why their credibility should be shot with our community. So the first one, Pastor T.D. Jakes. There's always been, he's the pastor of the Potter's House, very well known for just bursting onto the scene with having connections to Mr. Carlton Pearson and the Azusa Conference. But he has been most known for his church, and everybody knows who he is. But there's been some credibility issues. He's alleged to have sexually assaulted a young man. And allegedly paid off the young man's parents. And then there's been recent developments of a connection or relationship as the spiritual advisor to Sean Puff Daddy, aka P. Diddy, aka Brother Love Combs. Now, everybody that's a fan of hip hop culture and black culture knows that Mr. Diddy loves to party. And apparently, Pastor T.D. Jakes has indulged in the party's festivities. And apparently he's gotten down a few times at these quote-unquote freak-offs, if you will. But this is supposed to be the man of the cloth. This very same man also had a son pretty much get arrested in a sting operation not far from the church. Indecent exposure. Solicitation of a prostitute. At that, have had some type of extracurricular stuff going on. Some producing children that weren't in his relationship. Has his congregation lost credibility? Have people lost credibility? Has he lost credibility? He still has a congregation. It says a whole lot without saying a whole lot. This next lady, Miss Paula White. The previous president, number 45, Miss Paula White was supposedly his spiritual advisor. Supposedly. Yet, this man has boldly bragged about grabbing women by the JJ. I'm not going to say the other word because we're on the air. But you know that other word. It rhymes with bussy, but starts with a P. But she made bold claims as a prophet that he would win the 2020 election and had this viral moment where everybody just laughed. As if because he was going to win undoubtedly. And when that didn't happen, she was very, very quiet with a face full of crow. But she's also said she's a prophet, which is disturbing because that bold prediction did not happen. Has she lost credibility? Not with that base. The next man is Mr. Joel Ousting, the man with the mysterious, scary, weird smile. A whole hurricane happened in his city, and he would not open his church to let the people in to have refuge. And the crazy part about it, he only opened up the church after people brought it to the public's attention. And this man also said, I'm not a pastor. I'm just here to spread the word of God, but I'm not a pastor. I inspire people. That's what I do. That's Mr. Joel Osteen for you. But has he lost credibility? This next man, Bishop Eddie Long. out of Atlanta. This man has been a pastor for a long time. This man has traveled the world.
He's dead, isn't he?
Gotten information from very, very, very important people like Dr. Anthony Browder that could actually help our community as a whole. But he chose to keep the information to himself. And I believe he said, and quoted, I'll miss out on that, all that money. He chose money over the, yes, he passed away a few years ago. And then on top of that, 2 years before he passed, it had came out that he had been sexually assaulting and having relationships with young men in college. And in order to keep them quiet, he was paying for their tuition, books, room and board, and everything. When these allegations came out, this man would
Isn't that called blackmail?
go up in his pulpit and preach the sermon, and nobody would challenge him or say anything. And then you just go on. Has he lost credibility? Another young man, I'm not going to call him a young man, another man, Mr. Larry Reed, songwriter, pastor, minister person. It has come out that he's been involved in some SA with men and young men in the congregation and different groups, and even involved in some, yes, blackmailing, blackballing in another context. And it has even come out that he's been participating in wild P. Diddy-like parties of his own. Has this man lost credibility? He still has a pretty large following, still has a congregation. This next person is also out of Atlanta. Mr. Dr. Creflo Dollar of the world. Has he lost his credibility? His congregation isn't as big as it once was, but it's still big nonetheless. Now, let's talk about this next lady. This next lady's name is Bella Sloan. First time I saw a video of hers, it was 2014. A friend of mine brought something to my attention. A conversation we'd had a few years prior to that. And then I watched this video and looked at the date of the video. This woman had predicted something that ended up happening over a conversation we'd had, that me and my friend had a couple years before. And I was like, and when my co-host brought this particular person to my attention, I was like, wait a minute, I've heard this name before. And then I went on YouTube, and the exact video that my friend pulled up was the first video I saw. I was like, oh man, this lady has predicted a lot. This lady has actually predicted some of the stuff that's going on with Mr. Diddy right
Hmm. So it sounds like the psyche doing better work than the pastors.
Yes. And that's a whole nother thing within itself. And then I gotta bring up this young lady's my age. Dr. Mumpy. I call her a spiritual guide. This woman, she's she's a natural doctor. She's very educated. She worked with the World Health Organization. This lady has a wealth of information, and she's very, very in touch with the spiritual world as well. This woman is so in tune with everything. She said, I have to get out of this city and get to the countryside of her home nation so she could be better tuned with herself and her spiritual being. And this lady is very credible, but how many people know this lady and the previous young lady, Miss Bella? Now, people watch Miss Bella Sloan's video, but the other thing is, for the amount of people that listen to her, there's probably twice as many that overlook this lady and don't even know who she is, which is scary. But for some crazy reason, we all know who Candace Owens is. This woman won a lawsuit, a discrimination lawsuit, with the help of the NAACP. Then she turns around. After she turns around, gets this money, and then a certain person runs for office, and she champions them. And while she's championing them, the very people of the community that help her win her lawsuit, she trashes them and talks about them. And then just recently, she spoke on Palestine, and her platform was taken from her. And now she is trying to get back into the good graces of community that she spent the last 9 years trashing and talking bad about. But for some crazy reason, people that vote like her still give her credibility. These are just a few people. These are just a few people. We're kind of going over time. Yeah.
And I would like to add, thank
I
you
went
for,
over about 10 people on this list.
well, thank you for giving us something to think about, and some people, even if we don't really know them, we can try to get to know them. And even if these people, some of us may say, well, I don't go to their church, I don't listen to them. But our pastors or our spiritual leaders might be just like some of these people, or probably need to be like some of the other people that we may not know or have a lot of respect for. As I stated in the beginning, what are we putting our credibility in? And have we actually lost credibility in some of the stuff we giving a lot of value to? Because if not, then this is our opportunity to make some adjustments. We all can learn from each other, but if we're not willing to work with each other, then we're wasting energy. And there are too many of us in the community, not talking about the other people right now, too many of us in this community like to suck the energy and the life out of the people who are doing all of the work. This is a job that all of us can take part in, one way or the other. We all have to, put some skin in the game, because it's going to take all of us to bring the earth back in balance. Right now, the earth is so far out of balance. And it's up to us. It really is. We've seen for the past 2,000 years that European energy has no interest in bringing anything to the earth except chaos. It doesn't respect the earth or any of the beings on the earth. So just knowing that is enough to just, don't have to be mad, don't have to be angry, just have to be wise enough to know the difference between when you're wasting energy trying to convince somebody or a group of something, and when it's time to just know who they are, call them out what they are, and then, you get yourself together and you have the people who want to be helped. They're going to destroy each other because that's what they're good at. So we don't have to be a part of that. We see that. We see that where a man is, in the name of what he considered his own, quote unquote, his jihad, he's continuing to kill people. And this country is supporting it because that's what they've always done. And I'm not going to give the people who call themselves, who practice Islam, a pass either, because all of those people, all of those very rich countries, i.e. Saudi Arabia, they could have done something. They didn't want to. The people in Palestine, hopefully they're recognizing that they were a pawn. That's all they've been. They've been a pawn because they weren't a part of, quote unquote, a national identity. They are part of a cultural identity. They don't actually have a real landmass that they can call a homeland, although that is their homeland. But we don't live under that kind of government. That government left when the Europeans came out the earth and the earth stopped being shared by all of humanity. And everybody started gaining territory, saying, this is mine. I'm staking my claim on it. That's what the Europeans did with the land that our ancestors are from, right here in this country. And we still struggling trying to get our identity back. Some of us are, looking through our own history records. Some of us are doing the DNA test. If that's what floats your boat, do the DNA test. But after you do the DNA test without knowledge and community to guide you through that, what are you going to do with it? I can tell you what I'm doing with mine. I'm talking to you right now. I'm trying to educate you on the same way the ancestors educate me. Show people the connections. Show them how the stuff was done. Let them know Nearly Fuller is not dead, and there were a whole bunch of Nearly Fullers to give us information to let us see that the energy that runs the world is actually sucking the life out of the earth. And with that, I hope you guys have a good evening. Sign us out, Mr. Chocolate. As Mr. Chocolate normally says, Stay ready so you won't have to get ready. That's the broadcast tonight for The Chocolate Life.